What do you think would happen if, one day, you simply walked away? Not with a grand gesture, not in anger or with a need to explain yourself, but just left, disconnected. Removed yourself from the spaces you once occupied, from the conversations that used to pull you in, from the silent expectations woven into your presence. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you chose to step away, not as an act of defiance, not out of resentment, but simply because you no longer wished to stay? Most people assume that life will continue as it always has, that your absence will be nothing more than a brief adjustment, a momentary gap that soon fades into the background. But that's not how it works. Because absence, true absence, does something to the people left behind. It shifts something. Not immediately, not obviously, but in ways that are difficult to define. At first, they barely notice. It's just a change, an empty space where you used to be. They tell themselves it doesn't matter, that people come and go all the time. But then, something strange happens. They catch themselves expecting to hear your voice, only to be met with silence. They reach for you in moments where they once felt your presence, only to realize there's nothing there. And suddenly, your absence is no longer just a missing presence. It's a disruption, a disturbance in the rhythm they had unknowingly come to rely on. They start to wonder why it feels this way. Why something so simple, your decision to step away, feels so unsettling. And then it begins to dawn on them. It's not just you they miss. It's what your presence allowed them to be. The way you listened without judgment, the way you made them feel seen, the way you absorbed things they never had to say out loud. People assume they are whole on their own, that their sense of self is independent of those around them. But when you leave, they are confronted with a reality they weren't prepared for. Maybe they depended on you more than they thought. Maybe they needed you, not for what you gave, but for what your presence meant. And now, without you, they are left wondering what remains of themselves in the absence of what you reflected back at them. But the mind resists discomfort. It fights against what it doesn't want to see. So instead of facing the truth, they rationalize. You didn't matter that much. They never needed you in the first place. Or worse, they begin to reshape the narrative. You were selfish for leaving. You abandoned them. You were the problem all along. They won't say it out loud. Maybe they won't even fully understand it. But deep down, they feel it. The disturbance, the imbalance, the weight of something they can't quite explain. And whether they try to ignore it, suppress it, or twist it into resentment, one truth remains. When you walk away, you don't just disappear. You leave something behind. And the people you leave behind will never be quite the same. Your absence isn't just a missing presence. It's a disturbance, an interruption in something they never questioned until now. They assumed life would continue unchanged, that nothing significant would shift. But absence has a way of exposing what presence conceals. They don't just lose you, they lose what they could see of themselves through you. There are moments they catch themselves expecting a reaction that never comes. A joke that once had an automatic recipient now lingers in the air unspoken. A thought that was once instinctively shared now stays locked inside. The rhythm of their interactions feels slightly offbeat, like a song missing a note that no one else seems to notice. Something about the way they once saw themselves no longer feels intact. The mirror effect of your presence is gone. People don't realize how much of their self-image is shaped by those around them. They assumed they stood on solid ground, that their sense of identity was their own. But without your reflection, a quiet question begins to form. Who were they really, when you were there? They search for traces of what was lost, trying to find that version of themselves in other people. But reflections are never identical. No one mirrors them back in quite the same way. The validation they once received, the understanding they once felt, it's not easily replaced. So they adapt. They adjust the way they speak, the way they interact, sometimes without even realizing it. But deep down, something about it feels forced. Memories shift, distorted by the need to make sense of the change. Some elevate you into something more significant than you were, convinced that losing you altered everything. Others do the opposite, rewriting the past to minimize your role, convincing themselves that you never mattered that much. The mind prefers certainty, and when it can't find it, it rewrites the story until the discomfort becomes easier to carry. But there is no way to completely erase the effect of a mirror once it has shattered. The pieces remain, scattered in their subconscious, reflecting fragments of what once was. They may not speak of it. They may not even fully understand it. But something about the way they once saw themselves will never look quite the same again. The emotional chaos you trigger isn't immediate, and it isn't always obvious. It begins as a shift in the background, something barely noticeable at first. A hesitation, a moment of restlessness, an unspoken tension. They assume they are in control, that your absence is nothing more than an adjustment. But emotions have a way of making themselves known, whether they are acknowledged or not. There's an unease in conversations that once felt effortless. Words don't land the same way. Laughter feels slightly offbeat. They move through familiar spaces, but something about them no longer fits. Annoyance creeps in, disguised as indifference. They roll their eyes at the mention of your name, scoff at the idea that anything has changed, yet irritation lingers where there used to be ease. Frustration follows close behind. They search for something to pin it on, a justification for why everything feels slightly out of sync. Anger is easier than introspection, so they let it take the lead. Maybe you were the one who ruined things. Maybe you left too easily. Maybe you never cared. The story twists to suit the emotion, shifting blame to avoid facing what's beneath it. Then comes guilt. Quiet, intrusive, impossible to reason with. It arrives when the noise settles, slipping in through the cracks of certainty. What if they misread everything? What if they were careless with what they thought would always be there? They replay interactions, dissecting words, analyzing pauses, wondering if they could have changed the outcome. Avoidance becomes their defense. They steer clear of reminders, keep their thoughts occupied, bury whatever lingers beneath layers of distraction. But the absence follows them in ways they don't expect. A familiar phrase spoken by someone else, a sudden memory interrupting their focus. They tell themselves they've moved on, yet something in their body disagrees. People assume they decide how they feel. That distance erases emotions as easily as it creates them. But feelings don't obey logic. They surface when least expected. They attach themselves to moments that should mean nothing. And now, no matter how much they try to suppress, redirect, or deny, they are left with the truth. Your absence is not just something to move past. It has unsettled something deeper, something they were never prepared to feel. The search for meaning begins the moment you leave. They may not admit it, may not even realize it, but something in them refuses to let go without an explanation. It isn't enough that you walked away. There has to be a reason, a story that makes sense. And so, they begin rewriting you. Not as you were, but as they need you to be. Memories don't stay intact. They are reshaped, repainted, adjusted to fit the version of events that brings them the most comfort. Some turn you into a ghost, someone too significant to be forgotten, someone whose absence becomes larger than your presence ever was. They tell themselves they lost something irreplaceable, something rare, and in doing so, They elevate you to a place of nostalgia that no longer resembles reality. Others go in the opposite direction. They strip you down, reduce you to someone who never mattered as much as they once believed. They convince themselves you were never that important, that your absence is nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It's easier this way, easier to erase you than to face the discomfort of your absence. For some, the reconstruction is personal. They don't just reshape you, they reshape themselves in relation to you. They rewrite their role in the story, turning themselves into the one who was wronged, the one who gave too much, the one who deserved better. They need to believe they were right about you, or at the very least, that letting you go was necessary. But meaning is a slippery thing. The mind resists uncertainty, refuses to leave questions unanswered. It fills in gaps, smooths over contradictions, finds ways to make the past align with the emotions of the present. The mind isn't interested in truth. It's interested in resolution. And so, they search for meaning in things long past, in conversations that can no longer be revisited. It happens in quiet moments, in thoughts they didn't expect to have. They replay old words, analyze your reactions, looking for something they missed. They assign weight to things that never held meaning before, rewriting your intentions to match the feelings they carry now. One day, you are the best thing that ever happened to them. The next, you are a mistake they should have seen coming. The version of you they hold on to changes depending on the story they need to believe. And yet, the questions remain. Were you ever who they thought you were? Did they misread the past? Was there something more they should have understood? They search for signs in the details, for proof that the ending was inevitable. But no matter how many times they rewrite the story, one truth remains. The version of you they hold on to is not you at all. It is a reflection of what they need to believe, a construction shaped by the weight of what was left unresolved. But the mind does not like loose ends, and you have become one. So they keep searching, keep reshaping, keep trying to find meaning in something that no longer exists. Because letting go isn't just about losing a person. It's about losing the story they told themselves about who they were when you were still there. The silent aftermath always arrives, whether they're ready for it or not. The noise of emotions, the frustration, the denial, the questions that demanded answers, slowly fades. They don't wake up one day feeling different. There's no final moment of closure, no clean break between what was and what now is. The world looks the same, but something about the way they move through it has changed. They tell themselves they've adjusted. They convince themselves that your absence no longer holds weight, that they've outgrown whatever remnants of you still linger in their mind. And maybe they believe it. Maybe, on the surface, they even feel lighter. But silence has a way of revealing things they weren't ready to see. When the chaos subsides, something else remains, something they can't quite name, something that shouldn't be there but is. It's not grief, not sadness, not even longing. Just a space that refuses to be filled. They don't talk about it, because by now, there's nothing left to say. The people around them assume they've let go, that they've moved forward, that what happened no longer holds meaning. But absence doesn't simply disappear. It reshapes itself, weaving into their habits, settling into the quiet moments where no one is watching. It becomes part of the silence between their words, part of the hesitation before they reach for their phone, part of the way they think twice before sharing something they once would have said without hesitation. It's strange how things remain even after they are gone. They hear a phrase they once said to you, only now it sounds different. They walk past a place where you once stood, and for just a second, their mind plays a trick on them, as if expecting to see you there. The thought vanishes as quickly as it came, but the feeling stays, not sharp, not overwhelming, just there. A ghost of something that used to be real. Time dulls the edges of everything, even this. They no longer flinch at reminders, no longer fight to suppress whatever traces of you still exist in their subconscious. But the reminders don't need to be painful to be powerful. Even without emotion attached to them, they still hold weight. A weight that should have disappeared by now. A weight that lingers in the spaces they never expected it to. They go on as if nothing has changed. They laugh in new conversations, make new memories, fill the spaces where you once existed with other people, other distractions. But even in those moments, something feels slightly off. Not wrong, not broken, just different. They don't quite laugh the same way. Certain words no longer roll off the tongue as easily. There's a small, almost imperceptible shift in the way they carry themselves. It's subtle, but it's there. Some try to explain it to themselves, searching for logic where there is none. They were fine before you came into their life, so they should be fine now that you're gone. That's how things work. People leave and life moves forward. That's what they tell themselves. And yet, despite every rationalization, despite every effort to box it all away as just another experience that faded with time, the truth remains. Something within them has changed. And then there are those who stop trying to explain it. They don't force themselves to forget, don't try to rewrite the past to fit a more comfortable narrative. Instead, they let the silence settle. They allow themselves to feel the presence of what no longer exists without rushing to erase it. They don't call it grief, don't call it regret, don't try to name it at all. They just let it be. But no matter how they process it, the aftermath is never about forgetting. It is about recognizing that your absence was never just the loss of a person. It was the loss of a version of themselves that only existed when you were there. And that version of themselves, the one that belonged to that time, to that connection, to that specific moment in their life, is now gone too. And in the quiet, when there's nothing left to distract them, when the world slows down and their thoughts have nowhere else to go, they understand. This was never just about you. It was about what they lost within themselves when you walked away. Walking away does something that staying never could. It doesn't just change the dynamic between two people. It forces a reckoning. They might not have questioned your presence before, but now, in your absence, something unsettles them. There's no more comfort in assumption, no more certainty in knowing you'll always be there. The void speaks in ways that words never could. They dismiss it, convincing themselves that nothing is different. But absence lingers. It settles in the pauses between conversations, in the places where they once found reassurance, in the moments when they instinctively expect you to be there, and you're not. They adjust, or at least they try. Some pretend it doesn't matter. Others search for a way to replace what was lost. But nothing ever fits quite the same. Walking away isn't about creating distance. It's about reclaiming clarity. It strips away illusions, removes the weight of things that no longer serve you. It doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't mean you stopped feeling. It means you finally saw what was always there. Some will rewrite the story in their minds, shifting the blame, reshaping the past to make it easier to carry. Others will sit with what remains, feeling the weight of things they never thought they'd lose. And then there are those who will understand, long after you're gone, that your departure was never the loss they assumed it was. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from something or someone, only to realize later how much it changed you? Have you ever seen the weight of your absence reflected in someone else? Drop a comment below and tell me, what did leaving teach you? What did you gain by letting go? Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's talk about it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because here we don't just talk about what's easy, we talk about what's real. And something tells me you're exactly where you need to be.